Sato Shuichi is a 26-year-old office worker and a gamer who always aims to complete 100% of a game, so he's panting as he struggles to catch Takopa at level 90. He tells himself there's only one left and he'll finish his Pachman collection. He keeps ordering his monster to attack, urging it to go for it, and finish it off with all its strength, so his tension is peaking. Finally, a dialogue pops up saying Takopa wants to join your team, and you have collected all 400 types of Pachman. So Shuichi breathes a sigh of relief, then he lets out an excited "eh." Shuichi exclaims with joy finally, and I did it, raising his fist high, but the story of a player reaching 100% is only just beginning, and that's a completely different tale. After finishing the game at 2:18 a.m., Shuichi feels refreshed and wants to step out for some air and buy a bit of food, so he gets up and goes outside, but Japan has begun an entirely different chapter. While he spent the last few days focused entirely on the game, ignoring the outside world and living reclusively, Japan had become a completely different place, something he had no idea about. Shuichi utters "huh" in surprise and freezes when he sees two huge creatures standing at his front door. Those two creatures don't seem human, so Shuichi wonders what they are. Shuichi quickly shuts the door and bolts it, trying to calm himself as he asks, "What is that?" He tells himself it must be a dream and that he needs to wake up, but at the same time he hears a creature's roar outside, which terrifies him further, and he mutters to himself, "This is scary." Shuichi quickly pulls out his phone to check the news and sees the keyword, monsters appearing. He runs up the stairs to turn on the TV and sees an emergency broadcast. He hears a woman's voice say, "They've appeared here too," and she also cries out in panic, "Help." According to the broadcast, creatures resembling the game's monsters are attacking people across the country, and Shuichi is shocked as he realizes the time during which he spent the last few days wholly focused on the game. He tells himself, "Fortunately, I didn't go outside," and feels lucky. Shuichi trembles at the thought of something terrible and, shaking, closes his eyes as he contemplates a possibility. But he can't stop thinking about it, so he worries and wonders, "It can't be." Shuichi trembles on the floor, trying to control himself, telling himself, "Stop it." He says to himself, "I just finished the game," and feels despair, yet he also realizes this is no longer a game. Shuichi feels hungry and thinks, "Even if I'm hungry, I can't go outside." He sees an image of a man disappearing after being attacked and is terrified. He also watches a female reporter being attacked by a huge monster, but can only stand there helplessly. The TV suddenly cuts to a broadcast pause after the reporter is attacked, and Shuichi panics as he realizes the food in his house has completely run out. He understands that if he keeps hiding in his room, he'll eventually starve, so he faces the grim choice of dying of hunger or going outside to confront the monsters. Judging the situation to be like a game novel scenario, Shuichi confidently thinks this is a great opportunity for a veteran gamer with his knowledge, so he guesses the creatures in this initial area must be low-level monsters that look weak. He decides to wrap a magazine around his stomach for protection and prepares a crude weapon to head to the grocery store, but the doorbell suddenly rings, startling him terribly. Fearing that modern monsters have learned to use doorbells, Shuichi is extremely wary as he prepares to open the door, but when he peeks through the crack he sees two neighbors standing outside. It was a 19-year-old nurse named Sayuri Miyata and a 28-year-old freelancer named Toru Kinoshita. They explained that they had heard noises coming from his room and came to seek companionship amid the chaos. The two neighbors suggested Shuichi move with them to an evacuation area for safety, and Kinoshita urgently asked for food for his pet hedgehog, Sony. However, Shuichi had to decline because his own food supplies were running out, so Miyata offered to have both of them come to her apartment to share the remaining food. After quickly entering her apartment, which Miyata said the monsters seemed unable to breach, Shuichi immediately devoured the small rice balls she had prepared and expressed deep gratitude. But as soon as his hunger was sated, he shifted the mood and proposed a bold plan of action he had just devised. Shuichi stunned the neighbors by bluntly suggesting the three of them team up to kill the monster lurking outside, and he added that social media reports were claiming the real world had turned into a massive video game. So he wanted to probe whether they had any gaming experience before, so they could prepare properly for the upcoming fight. Based on online posts from survivors, Shuichi explained that killing the strange creatures would let people level up, and he stressed that increasing strength was essential for preparing to travel to farther lands. Therefore, he proposed a tactic of using their numbers to surround and eliminate a lone monster, though Miyata still showed clear hesitation about this violent act. Shuichi emphasized that taking the initiative to deal with threats would give them more means of self-defense if suddenly attacked, so Kinoshita immediately resolved to join the fight to protect his little hedgehog. That courage spurred Miyata to make her final decision. She agreed to participate because she didn't want to watch the two men be in danger, and hoped that greater numbers would raise their chance of victory. The three quickly gathered makeshift tools, a baseball bat, a frying pan, and the building's fire extinguisher, to execute the tactic. Their target was the small green creatures to surround and then overwhelm with repeated attacks. So when Shuichi spotted a lone target standing on the street, he signaled the group to get ready to rush in at once. They all sprang the ambush, surprising the creature Shuichi judged to be a goblin from a fantasy world, which let out a pitiful scream. Though the extinguisher was heavy, he believed the monsters in the starting area weren't that strong. So he put all his force into striking the creature's head, telling himself that destroying this weak spot would surely kill it. Shuichi threw his whole weight into it, hitting the monster's head with the fire extinguisher and shouting for it to die and turn into experience points for him. At the same time, Kinoshita and Miyata swung the baseball bat and frying pan, combining for a powerful group strike that made the creature cry out in agony. Immediately after the coordinated attack, the goblin dissolved into streams of light just like the reporter on TV, which left Miyata astonished as she asked whether they had indeed defeated it. Although relieved that the monster left no corpse, Shuichi quietly checked his status and hoped the social media claims about leveling up were true. A strange beam of light suddenly appeared and displayed level 1 notification text above all three of them, causing Kinoshita to panic and shout at seeing words floating in empty air. While Shuichi marveled that everything was unfolding exactly like a real video game, Miyata called out to him to ask about the oddity that had just appeared. Miyata curiously asked Shuichi what skill meant when she saw the healing spell text displayed before her, and he answered that it was like a certificate that allowed use of a technique. Shortly after, Kinoshita excitedly boasted that he had a taming skill and turned to ask Shuichi, leaving him flustered as he checked his own status panel. When Shuichi focused on the status panel, he was stunned to find he possessed two special skills: infinite storage and the monster encyclopedia. The appearance of the monster encyclopedia text hit the mind of a completion-obsessed collector like him hard. Shuichi couldn't contain his joy. He raised his fist and shouted happily, knowing this world still had collectible elements for him to conquer. This moment marked the kickoff of a new, frantic life for the game completion addict in this modern fantasy world. Chapter 2 begins by summarizing how Japan transformed into a video game world, where people can level up and gain skills by killing monsters. At this point, Shuichi held a crude weapon, Miyata had a healing ability, and Kinoshita possessed a beast-taming skill as they prepared for the journey ahead. When Kinoshita asked about the taming ability, Shuichi explained it's a skill that lets the user subdue animals or monsters to make them allies. This explanation amazed Kinoshita, who immediately lifted his pet hedgehog up to ask if it could fight alongside him, and Shuichi confirmed it could. Kinoshita kept cheering excitedly, thinking he'd gained an ultimate super skill, though he admitted he preferred to play a knight protecting the hedgehog rather than send it into battle. While Miyata happily congratulated them despite not fully understanding, Shuichi quietly guessed that his infinite storage skill originated from his compulsion to complete collections. Shuichi felt a bit crushed realizing his whole 20-plus years had been summed up by the system as completion-obsessed, but he quickly reassured himself that infinite storage was an extremely overpowered ability. The system displayed an explanation of the unlimited item storing feature, and then a tired-looking middle-aged man in a suit suddenly appeared and called his name. Miyata curiously asked Shuichi about the nature of his special skill, making him hesitate over whether to reveal the secret. He then decided to share that it lets him effortlessly store anything in a separate storage space. Miyata pressed to ask if literally anything could be stored, laughing and comparing the ability to an uncle who tidies up, leaving Shuichi helpless at the humorous image. Shuichi reassured himself that the monster encyclopedia skill would be a useful support for the journey, but then Kinoshita suddenly shouted when he found a strange app had auto-installed on his phone. He excitedly announced it was the creature catalog, which left Shuichi amazed to realize everyone in this world could freely view and check the same game information. Kinoshita cheerfully observed that the presence of skills and a creature encyclopedia made reality indistinguishable from a real video game, while Miyata looked worried as she stared into the distance, anxious about Japan's tumultuous future. The three stood silently, taking in the strange scenery around the apartment, as Shuichi inwardly judged that the survival rules in this new world were rigidly following system principles. Shuichi pondered that both humans and monsters in real life would dissolve into points of light when killed, and he couldn't be sure whether the dead could revive as they do in games. Just as the atmosphere grew very quiet, Miyata broke the tension by suggesting they test the special techniques they'd just acquired. Miyata honestly admitted she had no video game experience and didn't know how to operate her healing technique, so she wanted the two companions to guide her to avoid trouble when using it. Shuichi agreed, and Kinoshita eagerly volunteered to test first by using his telepathic communication skill on his beloved hedgehog. The moment Kinoshita activated his tamming skill, the hedgehog in his arms made familiar sounds, causing him to exclaim in astonishment as he suddenly fully understood his pet's words. He was deeply moved by his pet's resilient heart, and the hedgehog continuously emitted adorable rays of light that made the atmosphere feel more bonded. Kinoshita hugged the little hedgehog tightly and sobbed loudly, promising they would rely on each other for life. This left Shuichi and Miyata speechless because they heard no telepathic stream. Immediately after, Shuichi guided Miyata through the next test by having her concentrate on a chant. She raised her hand forward and decisively activated her healing magic. When the spell finished, Miyata happily reported that the small scratch on her finger had been completely healed, which amazed the two companions at the miraculous effect of the skill system. Although no one in the group was seriously injured at the moment, they all agreed the ability was very useful. Then they decided to ask Shuichi to test his storage skill. Shuichi suggested they move to a large truck parked at the roadside nearby, so he could test the volume limit of what he could store. Once he had the target in sight, he raised his hand forward, and a strange pressure immediately enveloped the entire huge truck before them. The massive truck instantly vanished completely from reality without leaving a trace, which terrified Kinoshita and Miyata, while they repeatedly cheered in excitement at the skill's unbelievable power. They kept asking where the giant object had been transported to, while Shuichi quietly put his hand behind his neck to savor the miraculous result he had produced. Shuichi immediately returned the truck to its original place, because he thought taking someone else's property without permission was wrong, and he also noted the ability would be very helpful for the group. Miyata praised how cool the skill was, so Shuichi proposed returning to the apartment to gather as many supplies as possible to bring to the shelter, since he could store them all in the infinite space. After collecting a large amount of necessities like bottled water, fire extinguishers, and food for the hedgehog, the three began moving back outside together. Shuichi estimated these supplies could sustain them for a long time, so he decisively signaled everyone to set off toward the evacuation area at the junior high school. Shuichi privately felt proud to have gained such a convenient skill, but the mindset of a completion addict made him develop a deep dissatisfaction. He realized that if the storage had infinite capacity, he would never be able to completely collect every item, just as his two companions warned that goblin monsters lay ahead. Chapter 3 continues as the group moves along the street toward the shelter at the junior high school, amid the modern world becoming increasingly fantastical. When they encountered a strange creature blocking the road, Kinoshita and Miyata quickly began discussing coordination to prepare a joint attack like the previous battle. However, this time the target was a group of 3 goblins gathered at the corner, making the situation far more dangerous. Shuichi immediately shouted to signal his companions to get ready and proactively thrust his hand forward to cast his infinite storage skill toward the enemies. Shuichi's special ability directly sucked up the ground beneath the goblins' feet into the separate storage space, creating a deep pit. The sudden incident caused all 3 grotesque creatures to lose their balance and fall straight down into the pit, while Kinoshita and Miyata remained poised to attack. Shuichi's tactic was to use infinite storage to make a pitfall trap to immobilize the monsters before easily dispatching them. Once the goblins were completely trapped in the pit, the little hedgehog Sony was launched down to perform a series of powerful, continuous attacks. The goblin group was quickly defeated and vanished into streams of white light, while Kinoshita proudly held up his pet hedgehog for Miyata to celebrate the victory. Kinoshita hugged his pet and sobbed loudly, praising how cool it was, which made Shuichi beside him inwardly startle as he realized the hedgehog's power even surpassed both of them. Shuichi quickly pulled out his phone to access the Monster Encyclopedia app to check what system information had been updated after the recent battle. The screen clearly displayed entries for Thief Goblin and Archer Goblin that had just been recorded, causing a slyly satisfied look to appear on his face. The extreme instinct of a completion addict immediately plunged Shuichi into a bright vision of filling the entire real-world creature encyclopedia. He stood dazed, smiling happily while his two companions kept calling his name to urge him to continue along their challenging survival journey. Miyata grew very worried when she noticed the surrounding atmosphere was completely silent, and she said the group hadn't encountered any survivors, only monsters everywhere. Although she guessed that such loud fighting should have attracted attention, Kinoshita reassured her that people may have already evacuated to the junior high school, so he urged the group to hurry on. Kinoshita chatted happily with the hedgehog in his arms, which made Miyata silently think he would be quite handsome if not for his odd personality. At the same time, Shuichi focused on abandoned belongings and a car left with the key still in the ignition beside bloodstains on the road, so the group fell silent, understanding the horrific disaster unfolding before them. Seeing the desolation and absence of people made the three of them quietly form very grim speculations about the current situation. They feared a large number of innocent civilians might have been attacked by the monsters, and immediately dissolved into points of light like the creatures they had just slain. Shuichi shivered at the terrible prospect, but quickly reassured himself thanks to posts still updating continuously on social media. However, his and Kinoshita's phone signals suddenly cut out completely just as the group spotted a convenience store still open ahead, so they decided to go inside to check supplies. Upon entering, they were astonished to be greeted by a girl with strange cat ears, who enthusiastically announced the store was stocked with drinks and food. When Kinoshita and Miyata wondered how she could be safe there, the clerk laughed and declared she was an NPC who didn't understand those complications, urging them to buy quickly. Recognizing her as a system-type character from a video game, Kinoshita asked about any purchase limits. The clerk replied there were no limits and offered to sell all items in the store as a pack for 10,000 yen, which left Shuichi inwardly shocked at the absurdly low price. The clerk suddenly grew serious and asserted that Japanese money would soon hold no value in this new world, sending a chill down Shuichi's spine. Right after the system confirmed successful acquisition of all supplies, the cat-eared girl cheerfully promised to reveal a very useful piece of information to reward their bulk purchase. The clerk used a map to point out that there were currently two routes, north and west, that the group could take to reach the junior high school. She explained that the north route was a detour but had very few enemies, while the west route hit a terrifying rabbit monster, which immediately caught Shuichi's attention. The completion obsession instinct rose instantly, making Shuichi excited as he secretly planned to head west to hunt the novel rabbit monster. However, Miyata and Kinoshita were terrified, and both rejected that idea, firmly insisting the group take the safer north route. Not wanting to dampen his teammates' spirits, Shuichi hid his ambition and forced a fake smile as he agreed to take the north route. While the clerk wished them a safe journey, Shuichi quietly and clearly recognized his true survival goal in this fantastical world. The group continued toward the junior high school, an estimated 30-minute walk from their apartment, a distance not considered too far. However, their survival trek was immediately interrupted when a new pack of bizarre creatures, Thief Goblin, Mage Goblin, and Archer Goblin, suddenly appeared to block their path. After quickly coordinating to wipe out the obstructing monsters, they noticed enemy numbers were increasing, and the system displayed loot notifications for a bow and a staff. Miyata asked if either of her companions was injured and expressed gratitude, saying she surely couldn't have survived this disaster alone. Understanding Miyata was studying nursing, Shuichi thought to himself that having to take the lives of monsters would place heavy psychological pressure on a girl. At that moment, Kinoshita said the pet hedgehog Sony was using a psychic ability to send heartfelt encouragement to Miyata, which moved her deeply and prompted her to thank the little creature. Watching Kinoshita cling to his pet with overly saccharine words, Shuichi could only think helplessly that pet owners often display strange behaviors under pressure. While Miyata marveled at the telepathic bond between them, Kinoshita confessed that, although he still couldn't believe the horrific reality, he was very grateful for the hedgehog's companionship. Kinoshita lifted the little hedgehog high into the air and praised it like a pure angel descended into this chaotic world, which made Miyata inwardly sigh that he'd be handsome if not for his eccentric personality. Moved by his companion's kindness, Shuichi silently resolved that he would protect them and get the group to the shelter at all costs. However, his desire to hunt exotic creatures to fill the real-world monster encyclopedia suddenly surged, plunging Shuichi into intense inner conflict. He wrestled between the duty to keep his teammates safe and the fierce passion of a completion-obsessed gamer, just as Miyata spoke up, noticing his odd expression. Seeing Shuichi silent, Miyata voiced her concern to Kinoshita that he might be under too much psychological strain given the dangerous, volatile situation. Kinoshita agreed and added that he could cope because the monsters merely vanished into light rather than spilling gruesome blood, so he encouraged everyone to keep going. Just then Kinoshita suddenly patted Shuichi's shoulder to point out a large shopping center by the roadside and suggested they stop in to gather more supplies. As they approached a shop called Nico Home, the familiar cat-eared girl reappeared and joyfully announced a clearance sale, inviting them to take whatever they wanted. Shuichi, curious, asked the clerk if she was the same person from the convenience store earlier, but the cat-eared girl immediately brushed it off and pretended not to know. While Kinoshita and Miyata regretted not finding any survivors hiding there, the group used Shuichi's storage ability to gather many picnic items and chainsaws into their stock. Shuichi continued to exploit his special power to sweep all external battery chargers and other useful electronics in the store into the infinite storage. At that moment, Miyata asked if he had contacted his relatives, and Shuichi replied that social media and phone signals were all down. Miyata worriedly said she understood Shuichi's concern for his family, but in truth he was merely inwardly disappointed. He hadn't had time to check the catalog of monsters appearing. Shuichi considered infinite storage an extremely convenient ability that eased his fear of the catastrophe, and he also left some supplies at the shop for those who might come later. Shuichi realized his skill was incredibly versatile, able to seize the ground to create pitfall traps or strip enemies of their weapons in an instant. This powerful ability directly bolstered his confidence and sparked the idea of embarking on a long journey to conquer and complete the entire monster encyclopedia. After more coordinated battles, the three of them became fully accustomed to the combat rhythm and easily wiped out the goblin roadblocks. Kinoshita and Miyata cheered happily as they saw the group's levels rise significantly and the loot, such as staffs and bows, grow plentiful. Kinoshita excitedly found a fire magic skillbook dropped by a monster and handed it to Shuichi to see if the technique could be used. While Shuichi pondered the system's intent to help players level up, Kinoshita unexpectedly activated the book successfully, launching a massive fireball from his hands. Kinoshita kept shouting with delight, because this brutal reality was increasingly resembling a real video game. Miyata shyly admitted to Shuichi that, although the situation was dangerous, she felt a little amused and very fortunate to be traveling with the two of them. After a long period of persistently taking the northern detour routes to keep the group safe, the three of them finally reached the gate of the refuge at the junior high school. The system summarized that it had taken them half a day to traverse the grueling 5-kilometer distance to get there. Just as Kinoshita was tiredly complaining, Miyata suddenly announced that phone signals in the area had begun to come back, which caught Shuichi's attention. The moment Shuichi was distracted by his phone screen, a goblin hiding by the wall suddenly lunged from behind to attack him. Kinoshita immediately shouted a warning and decisively threw his pet hedgehog Sony into a spinning multi-strike attack to save his teammate. The monster instantly dissolved into points of light, and Shuichi hurriedly apologized and thanked them for saving his life at the last moment. Kinoshita kept proudly praising the little hedgehog's superior power, while Shuichi silently marveled at his odd behavior, just as an unfamiliar voice suddenly spoke from behind. Two older men standing inside the school gate were astonished and repeatedly asked the group how they had managed to defeat the terrifying creature. Seeing the situation outside remained complicated, one of the men urged them to quickly enter the school grounds for safety, because the monsters would not dare to invade here. Upon entering the refuge at the junior high, Shuichi noticed many civilians had come here to shelter safely. The older man also explained that the site currently held about 1,000 evacuees, and that official rescue operations had made little progress due to shortages of supplies. Shuichi worriedly considered that the refuge's food reserves would be hard to sustain with so many people, and no end to the disaster in sight. When Miyata voiced concern about potential monster attacks, the man reassured her that they wouldn't dare enter the school grounds, and that patrols regularly checked outside to protect the people. The group was quickly led to the refuge management office to meet a 46-year-old police officer named Godu. The officer thanked the patrol personnel and politely invited the three of them to sit down to discuss the situation. Officer Godu asked the three to register their personal information, including names and addresses, on the system form. Once they finished filling out the information, the officer's expression changed, and he bluntly asked whether they were capable of directly fighting the monsters. Shuichi frankly confirmed that the group could face small green goblins, provided their numbers were not too great. This answer made Officer Godu extremely pleased. He said combat forces were currently critically scarce, causing major difficulty supplying necessities, so he earnestly hoped they would agree to cooperate and assist. Hearing that, Miyata eagerly volunteered to help treat patients using her basic healing magic. And Kinoshita also affirmed he would help defend the refuge, confident his pet hedgehog could easily deal with the goblins, while Shuichi silently hesitated. Unexpectedly, Shuichi declined the offer and apologized to the officer, saying he had a compulsory goal he needed to complete and intended to leave. But to compensate for his departure, he proposed leaving all the weapon loot and the large stockpile of supplies the group had gathered for the management to freely distribute to the people. Miyata and Kinoshita were shocked and immediately challenged and tried to stop him, fearing the outside world was far too dangerous for him. Although his companions insisted the little hedgehog was also very worried, Shuichi remained resolute, explaining that the special skills granted by the system could fully protect him. Miyata, blushing, clasped her hands and asked whether this important task he had to do was a journey to travel everywhere and rescue people in distress like he had helped them. Answering those great hopes, Shuichi bluntly declared his true ambition was simply to hunt monsters to fill the system's creature encyclopedia. He excitedly explained he had a passionate obsession with collecting game catalogs and wanted to reach max level and obtain every item and hidden skill in existence. This eccentric gamer reasoning left Miyata and Kinoshita utterly bewildered and speechless, so they helplessly asked him to speak in simpler terms. Shuichi smiled and explained that if reality had become a video game, he wanted to experience a true adventure himself. Miyata quietly understood a man's urge to pursue danger, so she decided not to stop him while Kinoshita listened intently to his confession. After saying that their time together had been very pleasant, the group began to say their goodbyes and prepare to go their separate ways. Shuichi activated his storage and took out a large amount of supplies, food, drinking water, clothing, and vegetable seeds to give to the two friends. He continued to pull out wooden staffs looted from monsters, astonishing the officer at the system skill's unimaginable capacity. While Miyata and Kinoshita urgently urged him to take care, Shuichi gently patted the hedgehog to thank it and asked Miyata which direction she planned to take next. Shuichi shared that he had contacted his parents, who were at a refuge in his hometown, so he would hunt monsters while heading toward that location. He waved goodbye to the two companions and the hedgehog, then resolutely walked alone down the quiet road to begin his new journey. Shuichi secretly smiled, recalling Kinoshita's and Miyata's passionate urgings to fight together to gain experience points. He told himself they were both kind people, and he must complete this trip so he could return to see them soon. Chapter 6 opens with Shuichi walking alone amid deserted, ruined buildings in this modern fantastical world. This solitary journey is the next challenge for the completion-obsessed gamer on the path to filling the dangerous creature encyclopedia. Shuichi privately thought that while hunting monsters alone was liberating, he couldn't escape feelings of loneliness and emptiness. He suddenly realized Sony, the hedgehog's presence, had become extremely important to him, and secretly wished for a pet companion like the game's pet features. After many battles, Shuichi deduced the system rule that using a particular weapon or reading a spellbook would automatically teach him the corresponding skill. He silently envied Kinishida's taming ability, then shouted aloud in the street to remind himself to stay sane and not impulsively catch a random monster just because he felt lonely. A sudden loud noise erupted from the bushes, and two enormous, murderous rabbits instantly lunged out to block Shuichi's path. He recognized them as the killer rabbits the convenience store clerk had warned about, so he silently told himself to be careful in the face of these new, vicious-looking foes. Deciding to test the enemy's strength lightly, Shuichi selected a giant iron girder he had stored and dropped it straight onto the creature's position. However, the killer rabbit possessed terrifying speed and easily dodged the strike in an instant, causing his attack to completely miss. The killer rabbit suddenly charged and hit him directly, making him cry out in pain, but he soon realized he hadn't been seriously injured. He thought that if this were a Vorpal rabbit he'd be dead, and guessed this safety was likely thanks to his prior level-ups. After judging that this creature's movement was extremely agile, making pitfall traps or dropped object attacks easy to evade, he fell into thought to devise a more suitable combat plan. Shuichi came up with the idea to restrain and immobilize the monster, so he immediately activated his ability to raise earthen walls to enclose the target. Once the killer rabbit was completely trapped, he decisively dropped a massive iron girder from above to crush the enemy. A flash of vanishing light signaled the creature's defeat, and he breathed a sigh of relief that his new tactic had worked. The system displayed loot, a rabbit pelt and a packaged tray of rabbit meat, which astonished Shuichi and made him wonder if it was edible. He immediately checked the item's description on his phone and confirmed it was delicious rabbit meat, so he found this new hunting experience refreshing after days of only fighting goblins. He also concluded that rabbit monsters were fairly common in this area, and a bit stronger than the goblins they'd faced earlier. Shuichi realized he and his companions had been very lucky that the starting area only had weak goblins. If civilians here had faced killer rabbits from the outset without supportive skills, this real-life game would be a disaster. He began to worry about his parents' safety back home, imagining areas with far more ferocious monsters, despite having received a message that they were sheltering at a junior high school. Phone in hand, he decided to post on social media to share goblin behavior and warn that the rabbits locate targets by hearing, hopping to help other survivors. Shuichi was delighted to read a post from a user named Mara Ringo saying movable plant-type monsters in the park were easy to hunt, which made him feel connected to others and pray the social network stayed stable. Then he remembered a park not far from his current location. However, a series of tremors from surrounding monsters made him realize this area had an excessively high density of killer rabbits, and he criticized the system's design, fearing civilians might mistake them for escaped pets. Shuichi continued to charge and eliminate the blocking killer rabbits, inwardly annoyed that these rabbits lacked the variety of roles like warrior or thief seen in goblins, making a completion-obsessed collector like him bored and begin to resent the species. After accumulating enough experience from continuous solo battles, his status screen finally displayed the milestone. He reached level 20 as he stood at the entrance to the abandoned park. Gazing at the empty park scene, Shuichi recalled a brief time when he used to come here for walks to improve his health, and felt regret that the once bustling place where people walked dogs was now completely deserted. He scanned the area hoping to spot any survivors among the blooming flower beds when a giant, carnivorous flower with razor teeth suddenly rose up and cut off his train of thought. The sudden appearance of the plant-type monster made Shuichi startle and step back defensively, but he soon realized the creature just stood still and gently swayed harmlessly. He got excited and danced around it, performing playful taunts to test the enemy's reaction, then cheered when he confirmed the social media report was completely accurate that this immobile creature was extremely easy to hunt. Seeing the opponent couldn't move, Shuichi decided to pull out the goblin bow he'd harvested earlier to test a ranged weapon from a safe distance. He told himself he chose the bow because it was very powerful in a famous monster hunting game he'd played, yet his first shots all missed absurdly. Refusing to give up, he immediately put on the impassive face typical of level grinders and fired a rapid succession of arrows, believing the proverb that quantity will eventually hit the mark. One arrow finally struck, causing the plant monster to vanish in the familiar vanishing light as the system announced he'd successfully activated level 1 archery. Shuichi repeatedly cheered with joy and picked up the dropped loot, a vial of antidote, which made him intend to stay in the park to grind and raise his skill level. However, just as he put the vial away, A pitiful cry from something in the nearby bushes suddenly rang out, making him start and pause to listen. Shuichi heard a cry from the bushes and wondered if it was a monster, but the sound didn't resemble a dangerous creature. It sounded pitiable, as if begging for mercy. Then before him appeared a large creature with very soft, shaggy fur, constantly sniffing and crying with tears rolling down its cheeks. Shuichi was astonished and let out a questioning exclamation as he inspected the strange creature standing before him. But the animal, which looked exactly like a pet dog, quickly proved extremely friendly, wagging its tail and playfully sticking out its tongue at him. Shuichi privately judged the creature adorable but, with a gamer's mindset, immediately grew wary, suspecting it might be a cute, enemy subtype that lures players into traps when eye contact is made. However, seeing the animal continue to make mournful sounds, he guessed it was just a normal dog and bent down to ask if it was lost alone amid the chaos. Shuichi gently waved for the dog to come closer and reassured it that he wasn't dangerous, and the little creature sniffled in response. Suddenly the dog rounded its eyes in alarm, just before a giant wasp monster came charging in from nowhere at terrifying speed toward Shuichi's position. Completely surprised, Shuichi only had time to raise his hand to shield his face from the strong gust generated by the charge. But the shaggy dog leapt like a blade and clamped onto the enemy mid-air, astonishing him with that incredible reflex. The dog decisively tore the monster apart, which immediately vanished in the familiar vanishing light, while Shuichi hurriedly took out his phone to check and record the system's data on the giant wasp into the creature encyclopedia. After completing the registration, he beamed and asked the dog if it had just saved his life, praising the new friend's intelligence and bravery without holding back. The dog barked loudly in joyful response to the praise, which thrilled Shuichi as he saw cube loot blocks drop from the monster. He immediately pulled out his phone to check the item list and confirmed the drop was beeswax, while the shaggy dog happily danced around the fallen goods. Then the dog suddenly drooped its ears, and Shuichi wondered if it was disappointed the monster hadn't dropped something of greater value. But the animal suddenly barked repeatedly and kept pointing its head forward, making him realize animals in this new world had very expressive behaviors, and that it was urging him to continue onward to fight. Seeing the shaggy dog continuously dart toward a stationary carnivorous flower, as if signaling to coordinate an attack made Shuichi shudder, guessing it might actually be a masked berserker or a disguised monster. But he quickly dismissed the suspicion and agreed to raise his bow to aim at the enemy, understanding that this healing flower was very weak and killing, it would easily raise his archery skill level. The plant monster was swiftly mauled by the dog in a brutal attack and completely vanished, leaving Shuichi at a loss for words as he wondered whether this shaggy dog might be a Pomeranian. He thought that if the world hadn't fallen into this horrific fantasy disaster, the little dog would surely have had a peaceful, happy life being walked by its owner and loved by those around it. Watching the shaggy dog suddenly snarl ferociously as it tore the plant monster apart, Shuichi imagined its former owner would scream if they saw the scene. But once the target vanished into light, the creature immediately resumed its innocent, adorable appearance, and as he walked on he worried about the fate of its previous owner. Shuichi noticed the shaggy dog was very interested in the cuboid loot blocks that had dropped, so he guessed the animal seemed to be searching for something specific. When the creature picked up a small box and brought it to him, he checked the item on his phone. It was a bee stinger, and reached out to ruffle its head in praise for the little body's effort. The shaggy dog suddenly bit straight into Shuichi's hand, making him cry out in pain before the animal instantly released and ran off. This curt action made him furious, declaring it not cute at all, and he inwardly compared its odd temperament to the angelic obedience of the hedgehog Sony. The dog kept barking and jumping, so Shuichi said aloud that he understood it was urging him to fight properly rather than merely practicing archery on the side. Though he reminded himself his main goal was to fill the creature encyclopedia, he couldn't bring himself to abandon the lonely animal and decided to accompany it temporarily to help find what it was missing. The system displayed information that this park was home to rabbits, flowers, and wasps, and that attacking a healing flower would cause wasps to appear, so Shuichi tested his bow on a flying target. The moment his piercing attack hit, a huge swarm of wasps suddenly burst out from nowhere and blocked his path, making him cry out in horror. A giant queen wasp bearing a crown-like V mark on its head appeared unexpectedly, astonishing Shuichi. The instinct of a collector gamer who chases rare spawns surged up, and he excitedly exclaimed that a rare monster had appeared, and that he absolutely loved the opportunity. Shuichi thought rare monsters usually drop high-grade loot, and his adrenaline spiked even though he knew the queen was powerful and had many guards. He smiled confidently, assuming he had the shaggy dog supporting him, but when he turned around he panicked and shouted to see the animal had cowardly fled some time ago. The dog's distant barking snapped Shuichi back to look, and the giant queen wasp immediately gathered force and charged straight at him with deadly intent. The enemy's sudden, terrifyingly fast lunge made him only manage a shriek, while the shaggy dog stood in the distance barking loudly. Seeing the dog's repeated barks as a sign pointing to an escape route, Shuichi immediately judged it wanted him to run quickly in that direction. Without hesitation, he turned and used all his strength to sprint down the street to shake off the furious swarm of wasps crazily pursuing him. Shuichi frantically ran straight toward a public building located within the modern park grounds. He pushed the door with full force and dashed inside the public restroom, seeking a safe hiding place from the enemy's dangerous attack. Shuichi and the shaggy dog managed to get inside the public restroom, while the giant swarm of wasps continued to buzz wildly outside the window. He had to stand alone bracing the lock to block the enemy, worrying and wondering what to do with no battle plan at all. Chapter 8 opens by summarizing how the real world has fully transformed into a massive video game, and reiterates that Shuichi's infinite storage ability fits his completionist nature perfectly. Although he had previously received help from companions at the refugee camp, he was now traveling alone toward the neighboring city to search for his parents. Shuichi thought he had run in here trusting the shaggy dog's guiding barks would lead to an effective counter-strategy. But seeing the animal panting innocently with its tongue out made him immediately realize it actually had no plan at all. The giant queen wasp suddenly drove its razor-sharp stinger through the restroom door, causing Shuichi and the dog to reel back in alarm and defend themselves. He immediately activated infinite storage to drop a series of steel beams behind the door to crush the enemy, but when he peeked through the hole, he realized this crude attack had no chance of hitting. Shuichi judged that firing his bow from this obscured position was impossible, while stepping outside to face the dense swarm directly would certainly get him killed. Seeing the little dog still trying to snarl and intimidate the enemy, he sat down to focus on finding a step-by-step solution, because he didn't want to be trapped here for long. He identified two main problems. Too many enemies and their agile flight made ranged attacks hard to land, and he tried to recall common tactics from video games to apply in reality. He came up with the idea of using an area attack to clear crowds and impede the fast targets, so he immediately pulled a high-powered insect spray from storage. Imagining himself wearing a hat and protective mask, he shoved the spray nozzle through the gap in the restroom door. He pressed the button to unleash a vast cloud of toxic chemical smoke that blanketed the outside space, engulfing both the escort wasps and the queen in a dense haze. Shuichi kept pulling different pesticides and cleaning agents from storage to increase the toxin concentration, causing the escort wasps to be poisoned and fall to the ground in droves. Seeing the enemies completely paralyzed and unable to move, he executed a decisive move and dropped a series of giant vending machines from above to crush them. Shuichi realized the giant queen wasp, though weakened, was still alive and preparing to lunge, which terrified him. In the emergency, he combined a lighter with a chemical spray to create an improvised flamethrower and shouted a fiery battle cry. The makeshift jet of fire shot straight at the giant queen wasp hovering in midair amid the chaos. A powerful impact immediately produced a massive explosion that hit the boss monster across a wide area, to the shock of Shuichi and the little dog. Shuichi panicked when he realized the restroom wall had been completely destroyed, exposing him and the dog to the enemy's sight. He knew another hit would put their lives in grave danger. So in the urgent situation, he decided to find another object to serve as a barrier and loudly chose to release a vending machine from infinite storage to block the front. A massive vending machine suddenly appeared and slammed into place, creating a loud crash that decisively stopped the queen wasp's deadly ramming attack. The violent impact drove the monster's stinger deep into the machine's body, so it couldn't withdraw, allowing Shuichi and the little dog to temporarily escape the direct threat. Seeing the monster's stinger completely jammed, Shuichi immediately cheered because the chance to finish off the enemy had arrived. He repeatedly ordered all the steel beams and vending machines in storage released, while launching a continuous barrage of fireballs to overwhelm the target. A massive destructive light and a huge explosion instantly erupted, signaling the Queen Wasp leader's complete defeat. The tense battle ended, leaving Shuichi and the little dog utterly exhausted, only able to stand panting as they savored surviving the danger. Shuichi collapsed helplessly onto the restroom floor and let out a loud shout to release all the tension and fatigue after the life-or-death fight. The system then displayed a notification of successful harvests from the Queen Wasp, including a spear-like Queen's Blade, a Queen Wasp medal, and a jar of premium royal jelly. Holding the Queen Wasp medal, Shuichi silently admired its beauty and reflected that collecting special monster drops would make this survival journey more interesting. While he told himself this was a challenging real-life game, the shaggy dog excitedly dashed over, barking repeatedly around the jar of royal jelly that had dropped. Seeing the dog repeatedly turn toward the royal jelly, Shuichi took the item and asked if it was what the dog had been searching for to eat. But the animal shook its head decisively, leaving him bewildered, then rolled another can of food over with its paw. The dog's odd behavior gave Shuichi a sudden new idea, so he crouched and asked if it intended to bring this item as a gift for someone. The correct guess made the shaggy dog bark once excitedly, as a full confirmation of his question. Shuichi realized the reason the animal had approached him earlier was because it had seen him harvest fresh rabbit meat after the fight, so he pulled a packaged meat tray from storage. He smiled, handed the meat tray to the dog, and gently told it to quickly carry this precious food back to resupply its owner. Shuichi wrapped the ration securely to the dog with a cloth and apologized that he had to go the other way to search for his parents, so he couldn't accompany it to its former owner. He told the animal to use its speed to run straight home and not to provoke any monsters along the way, then watched as it decisively took off. Shuichi hugged the shaggy dog one last time and promised that after finding his parents he would return to this road to find it. The dog then grabbed the resupply tray and sprinted off in the opposite direction, while he quickly resumed his lone journey. Chapter 9 opens with Shuichi quietly writing a letter to his parents to express his worries about the turbulent situation outside. He then sped up along the street, after receiving a message that they had safely taken refuge at a middle school in the neighboring city. However, although Shuichi wanted to move quickly, he decided to linger in the park to frantically hunt the killer rabbits blocking the way. The reason was his collector's compulsion. He wanted more special weapons after realizing rare monsters exist in this world and yield high-tier rewards like the queen-stabbing sword he had just obtained. Shuichi felt exhausted because his level remained stuck at 24. Killing weak monsters gave no experience, so he set a goal to defeat at least 50 normal monsters to try to trigger the rare spawn rate. While he focused on using his phone to post rare monster spawn conditions to social media, hoping to share the information with the community, a loud noise suddenly came from the bushes behind him. A creature suddenly leapt out of the bushes and attacked, startling Shuichi into stepping back to defend himself. Immediately, his eyes widened with excitement when he saw a killer rabbit surrounded by a shimmering aura with the image of a Buddha behind it, realizing he'd luckily encountered a rare monster. Noting that the enemy's previous strike hadn't caused serious harm, Shuichi confidently asserted he could definitely defeat this rare target. He promptly applied the survival lessons from the wasp battle, drew the queen-stabbing sword, and unleashed a series of randomized thrusting skills forward to strike the creature. The decisive strikes hit, causing the rare killer rabbit to immediately dissolve into a familiar beam of destructive light in line with his all-out attack strategy. The system then showed a notification that Shuichi's swordsmanship skill had leveled up dramatically from 0 to level 2, making him exclaim in joy and praise the new weapon's power as 50 times that of a fire extinguisher. The system displayed the loot list from the monster, including a basic healing spellbook, a tray of premium rabbit meat, and a lucky rabbit tail. After checking the item description and learning the rabbit tail only increases drop rates when equipped, Shuichi reluctantly attached it to his back and grumbled in dissatisfaction at the absurd look for a 20-year-old man. He reassured himself that wearing the weird rabbit tail was fine since no one else was around, and the item would boost his chances of acquiring rare drops. However, the sky suddenly darkened and he realized night had fallen, dangerous with the appearance of specialized monsters, so he decided to find a safe building to hide and rest after a long day of fighting. Shuichi was thrilled to find a 24-hour internet cafe on the roadside, so he stepped inside and loudly asked if any other survivors were hiding here. But the silence was broken when a female NPC staff member in a maid outfit suddenly appeared and answered, startling him horribly. Shuichi was relieved to see a girl, but she corrected him that she wasn't exactly human. She was a system-side entity like the cat-eared girl at the convenience store earlier. The girl introduced herself as a dog type and produced a photo to ask whether he'd seen her companion along his route. The maid explained that system entities appear to keep the scenes packing when the main character talks to himself, which left Shuichi bewildered and confused. She then decided to gift him a reward for his effort, a key to open a secret door, but Shuichi soon realized it was actually just a rental car key. Shuichi quietly rejoiced that having transport would let him cover the 1-hour drive to his parents quickly, and voiced his deep thanks. However, he immediately noticed the staff member had vanished, so he decided to use the cafe's full amenities to rest overnight since monsters couldn't enter buildings. Shuichi found the cafe's kitchen and immediately planned to stow the drink counter and a bed into infinite storage to serve his long journey ahead. Then he firmly picked up a frying pan to prepare a special meal for himself in the style of a solitary diner. Shuichi enjoyed a delicious meal of premium rabbit stir-fried with salt and pepper, served with rice and instant miso soup, using the camping utensils he'd collected at the mall earlier. He quietly judged the experience like a fun camping trip and thought that filming a food video might attract viewers, then laughed at his own silliness since in this disaster there was no audience. Satisfied after the meal, Shuichi quickly cleaned up, then tucked himself under a blanket and slept comfortably on the cafe's cozy bed. The peaceful space made him feel as if the real-world catastrophe were a lie, but the complete absence of other people left him secretly regretting not having made friends at the refugee camp. Shuichi reassured himself that his mission to fill the creature encyclopedia was selfish, so recruiting others would be wrong and would burden the refuge's defense forces. He quietly wished for the ability to tame a pet to ease his loneliness before falling into a deep sleep and waking the next morning to head straight to the car rental shop. Shuichi entered the empty rental agency, wearing a thick racing protective suit he'd borrowed from a nearby shop to boost his defenses. He assumed the system giving him the key was a reward that entitled him to a vehicle, so he decisively took a white car to begin a very comfortable journey. Driving the car himself along the wide highway, Shuichi pondered what types of monsters would be typical in a high-speed area. As he half-remembered the urban legend of the Speed Granny, a gigantic, murderous presence suddenly drew near and shook the space outside the car window. The bizarre creature turned out to be a colossal armored knight riding a ferocious warhorse, blocking the highway lane. The enemy decisively swung a powerful slash that tore the air apart, sending Shuichi's car flying and flipping it entirely on the road, to his utter horror.